last time I had the pleasure of standing behind this podium and speaking to you all, must have been about 2 months ago, I asked the question, are you overcoming? That was a theme that was a lead up to Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I spoke of the obstacles that we must conquer in our everyday lives, you know, the devil, the world, our nature. I would like to continue along that theme. And the title of this continuation is Sin and the Law. Sin and the Law. If there was no sin in the world, there would be no need for the law, at least not for corrective purposes. Imagine, if you will, the people of the world in general, if they had kept maybe one or two of God's laws, what a difference that would make. How about the law against stealing? Stealing, theft, you know, that in itself is like a lie. I believe that the prophet Jeremiah groups it together with that law online. Imagine if no one stole. Such an impact that would have on one's household, on one's nation, one's family. Imagine no briberies, no extortion, no fraud in the world. And how about murder that's related to theft? And people who are, maybe the perpetrator didn't have any meaning to kill someone, but he could have been desperate. He just wanted to take what you had, and you gave him a hard time. But that would not exist either if the world, at least to the letter, kept that law. How about the one on adultery, illicit sex? What would be the one thing that would be wiped out if the world kept that? Well, I think the real big one is divorce. It just wouldn't exist anymore. And another thing that wouldn't exist anymore, because if there'd be no divorce, there'd be no broken families. And another thing in connection to that, there would be no rebellious children. Children doing their own thing, acting out. Why? Because parents are together, they express deep love for one another, and of course, they put that love out there for their children to be nourished in. Imagine that if there was to keep that. Sadly, that's not the case, isn't it? It's one of our great problems in the world. And they don't keep those two laws. They don't keep any of the laws of God, despite what they might think. Sin and the law go together like peanut butter and jelly. Bacon and eggs. Well, turkey bacon for us. All right? The Bible defines one to the other. Brethren, let's open up that beautiful book. Let us look at the definition. Turn to 1 John. 1 John chapter 3. This is a verse that is very universal. I believe I don't think I would be wrong if I was to say that collectively among us, we must have read it 1,000,000 times. Yet it's a verse that is crystal clear, leaves no room for interpretation. And let's read that. 1 John 3, verse 4. Whosoever commits sin transgresses also the law. The sin is the transgression of the law. So right there's your definition. Now, to the Christian world in general, the evangelical world, this would be an unpopular subject. to address for them. Because if they were to address it and do their homework on it, they would come to the same conclusion that we already know, that the law of God is binding today and beyond. So they'll probably keep that to themselves because they want to keep their thing going. They forget, or let me be more nice, perhaps they don't realize that God's law existed before the creation of Adam. Now, how do we know this? Well, let's turn to the book of Ezekiel. This is another chapter 28, which I'm sure that you all are very familiar with, because within that chapter, God addresses Satan the devil. Let's see. Did someone move it? Oh, there he is. Right after Lamentations. All right, I found him. I might have to consider getting a new Bible. This one's getting all beat up. Now, Ezekiel 28, in verse 15, but we'll read verse 14. And it reads, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set thee so. Thou was upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in you." That word, iniquity, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it's defined as a wicked act or a wicked thing. And then in parentheses, just after the definition, they have that three-letter word, sin. I was surprised to see that there, but I'm glad it was. Now, since Satan had sinned, that means that the law of God was in existence even before the creation of the angels. I bring this to your attention simply to show how deeply rooted sin is in prehistory and how it carries over into man's history. Satan brought about great destruction. As a matter of fact, that's what sin does. That's it. Sin brings about absolute destruction. It's its only purpose, to destroy. Satan's sin brought about the destruction of God's jewel in the heavens, our home, the earth. We read about that in Genesis. You know how in verse 2, the second verse of the Bible, it gives us an inkling of that. How God found the planet, how it was devastated, how it was covered in water. All that was done because of the sin of the angels. In human life, sin also destroys. As I mentioned before with these commandments, when you commit adultery, you run the risk of destroying your family. When you steal, you set a bad example, especially if you have children. And those are just two of the commandments. Imagine the rest. You know, when God renewed the earth, He made it habitable for us and for all living life. Everything that has the breath of life, He made it habitable for. And He did that out of love. And I find that His recreation of the earth is a perfect example of His love towards His creation, which includes all of us, brethren. Now, they say that the law of God is a law of love. You know, at one time, I was confused about that statement. I must have heard it a million times over the course of my years. And it never dawned on me, but one day I decided to open up Exodus chapter 20, and I read the Ten Commandments there, and I was surprised to see that the word love wasn't even mentioned And I was wondering, what did they mean by that? And it's a law of love. Now, to the unconverted mind, one would find that very difficult to accept. But Jesus Christ shines a little light on the subject of his law of love. As a matter of fact, he did it while the Pharisees were looking to entrap him. Let's read the answer he gave to that Pharisee. Turn to Matthew 22. Let's go to the New Testament. Matthew 22. Here we go. Matthew 22, starting in verse 37. This was his answer. Thou shalt love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, your complete being. And then he says, this is the first and great commandment. Now, when I read this, it dawned on me finally that this first and great commandment is a consolidation of the first 4 of the 10. As a matter of fact, us being here on the Sabbath day, which is one of the 4, is showing how we love our God. We come here to sing praise. We come here to be with one another, to show love towards one another. That's a beautiful thing because it makes our Father in heaven very, very happy.
Yes, sir.
And then he continues in verse 39, and the second is like unto it, just as important. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as yourself. Those are the last 6 commandments compiled together, starting with honor your father and your mother and ending with thou shalt not covet. And in between that is that law on stealing and adultery, plus a couple of others. This law is love. When we keep the law, we show love toward our Creator as well as our neighbors. We honor them. The commandments of God are not to be taken lightly. God's law is a living law. It's alive, just like you and I. When you keep it, it keeps you. It keeps you far from the penalty of death. A person that breaks God's law, well, they're not going to die right away, mind you. But that penalty will begin to weigh heavily on them because that's that one little thing in all human beings, conscience. You know? There was a time I picked up a pen off of somebody's desk and then I never put it back and I felt kind of bad about it. As a matter of fact, there was one time when I was out of the home and I was in a video game store and my wife calls me to tell me that our little dog breathed its last. And at that time I was holding a pen in my hand and I ran out the store with it. It wasn't intentional, but I felt so bad about doing something like that my conscience weighed heavily on me. But thankfully, after the things was done, as far as the preparation for our little animal, I did take it back, and I gave it back to the person in the store, because I just couldn't. It was an accident, and it bothered me greatly. God's law is a beautiful, beautiful thing. God's law is alive, like I said. Christ's sacrifice made it possible for people to be set free from sin. Much like the Israelites of old, who were set free by that strong hand of God from the slavery of Egypt, God sets us free from the slavery of sin. Because let's face it, that's basically what it is. Sin is slavery now. Because sometimes you can get so caught up in what you're doing that you're like in eternal servitude to it. And I thank God that He has set us free from it, called us to repentance, and start living godly lives. We must do our part to keep the law. We must live the law. And like King David, we should love the law. Love it. When we do this, when we submit to the great God to rule in our lives, He will empower each and every one of you to overcome and to put away sin from your lives. So let God write His law of love into our minds, into our hearts, and before you know it, sin will be a thing of the past. Happy Sabbath, everyone.